We've come a long way since the beginning of Numbers, right? We titled this, It's All About the Math, because of the first chapter. We did a census, and there's a problem with the numbers. And so where we started, we've gone 40 years since the beginning of Numbers. And so the reason why we started Numbers, because I said the Hebrew title is In the Wilderness or in the Desert. How many of you have been in the desert before in your life? I think every hand went up. And so this book is for you. So I started Numbers with the idea of a wedding imagery. So Exodus is the betrothal. If you obey me, I will make you a kingdom of priests. Out of all the nations, you will be special. You'll be my prized possession. This is where God and Israel get engaged. Then we went through Leviticus. Leviticus is where they're making all the vows, where God says, here's what I want from you for holiness. And Leviticus is filled with grace. The very opening sentence, whenever any of you want to make an offering, here's how you do it. It's an invitation. It's not like the ancient law codes. You must do it. Because the ancient law codes, they're all designed, all the nations around, to appease the gods and discern the will of the gods. And Leviticus doesn't allow either one. So this is how you step into a relationship with God. So this is the wedding, the vows part of the wedding ceremony. Then when you get to Numbers, this is where you're actually past the honeymoon. By the way, back in Leviticus, they say several times, all that the Lord has said we will do. And then they turn around and make a golden calf. They're human. They're just like us, right? And so Numbers now, they're past the honeymoon, and now they're into real life. And life is very hard. There's no question about it. And Numbers reveals that because God is taking them to places where they're not used to going, okay? Which is what He does with us. He takes them to a place where there's no water. Why would He do that? Because the moment we decided to rebel against God, then some level of suffering becomes necessary. Otherwise, why need God? How do you tell somebody? I made this comment a few months ago, and a person came up to me, a visitor, and said, you just described my life. How do you tell somebody that's got a beautiful wife, 2.3 kids, 2 dogs, a couple of BMWs, and a swimming pool if they need the Lord? That's hard to do that in our country, isn't it? It's much easier in the slums in Cambodia, where they have nothing. It's much easier. So we have a challenge. All right? And so Numbers is about God taking them to places in the desert where He's trying to get them to come to Him. All right? There's no water. All they have to do is ask. But they don't. They complain. That's all they have to do is ask. There's no food. All they have to do is ask. But they don't. They complain. So Numbers is taking a people, they never got slavery out of their system. They just couldn't get there. And He's working really diligently to get them to think differently about who this one true God is. Leave all the gods of Egypt behind. Don't even engage in the gods of Canaan and all the nations there. Forget them all. I'm the one true God. And they don't ever quite get there. And so when you read Numbers, if you just read it through, and it looks like it's the same pattern. Complain, God punishes, complain, God punishes, complain, God punishes. Right? How many of you read Numbers and seen that pattern? Yeah, most of you. So it's just like a cycle, right? That's actually not what's happening. When you read it carefully, they do complain. That's pretty routine. But every time God responds to them, He responds in a different way than He did before. And He doesn't repeat Himself. Okay? He uses different approaches, different techniques, different language to try to get them to draw closer. So Numbers is the story of us. And that's what God does in our lives. He just doesn't punish. We don't think that way. I've asked the question, how many of you have gotten angry in the last month? Almost every hand goes up, and the 3 of you that didn't, you're lying anyway. So, and God didn't punish you, right? He didn't punish you. That's not the way He works. He works redemptively, is the technical language. When we find ourselves at a crossroads or we go astray of the Lord or we're stuck in sin, all those things happen. Okay, that's the great thing about being a senior pastor. I know a lot of your lives. And so when that happens, God doesn't punish. He steps into your life in a way that starts to direct you and get your attention and guide you. And so it becomes an act of grace. That's why Paul says in Philippians that suffering is an act of grace. It's part of the grace from the Lord. So you don't go doing what you want to do. It's designed to draw you back closer to Him. So I've said many, many times over the years, if you don't feel the passion that I talk about, that's okay. It just means you're a little bit too far away from the Lord. That's all it means. This is why we do communion every week, to give you the chance to just take that step closer, one step closer to the Lord. He loves it, okay? Just take that one step closer. And so Numbers is that journey of a rebellious people, which we all are, let's be honest. I got my hand raised. Okay, we're a rebellious people, and God intervening in a different way each time to get them to come this way. Okay, well, now we get to the second census. We're in Numbers 26. It's a long list of names. Okay, long list of names. So here's where we are. We're standing at the edge of the promised land. We're there. 40 years are up. We made it. Everything we've placed our hope in, we're right there. I wrote an article, published an article, how Paul's Bible was what we call the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures. He didn't have the New Testament. He hadn't written it yet. None of them had. And so he organizes his thoughts along the journey that we've been taking. So you think of, remember as children, you start with creation, then you have fall, then you have the flood, then you have Abraham and redemption. Remember all that? We learned all that? Well, that's exactly the way Paul lays out Romans. Okay? He starts off with how much he loves them. They're a new creation. And then at the end of chapter 1, oops, the wrath of God is being revealed against all of our godlessness. We sin. And then from there he moves to chapter 3, but God has provided redemption through a son, and then he uses Abraham as an example, okay? And so Romans is laid out exactly like the Pentateuch. The path, story by story. And then when you get to the place where the promised land fits in, after the desert in Romans 7, guess what's there? The Holy Spirit. That's what the promised land was all about. Life with the Lord. A land flowing with milk and honey. What did Jesus say? I've come that you might have life and you have it abundantly right now. When we say eternal life, what we often think of is what happens in the future. Eternal is just an adjective. Came that you might have life. It starts today. It goes on for eternity, but it begins today. So Paul can say, we are part of the new creation. That's why we designed Sunday morning. Don't you just love it that our own people stepped up today to lead in worship? Was that good? Yeah, that was good. Thank you. Shane, wherever you are, thank you. I mean, it's just wonderful. And so when we want Sunday morning to be a place where when you step in here, the world is outside. And just for a moment, you step into the new creation. We give each other hugs, we shake hands. Some people hit me. I mean, all kinds of fun things, like that, right? And that's what it's like when you step into the new creation, because pretty soon, a lot of you are going to go back to work and you step back into the old creation and you're trying to figure out how to live as a new creation Christian in the old creation. And there's nothing easy about that. That's about as challenging as it gets. So every Sunday, we want this to be just a moment of rest. Why we do communion every Sunday. Just so you taste it again once a week, at least once a week, so that you come forward and you experience that new creation experience of joy. That's what we're created for. And we're going back and forth between the new creation and the old creation and trying to live one way. It's easy in the new creation world, but it's difficult in the old creation. I've said many times, the answer to sin, believe it or not, it's not prayer. The answer to sin is spiritual warfare, which is a community exercise. When I'm with you, I don't want to sin. It's when I get isolated out there alone that the weaknesses begin to, and Satan comes after me when I'm by myself. And all I have to do is find one of you to hang out with over coffee, and I'm doing okay again. Right? The temptations just dissolve and go away. That's the story of Numbers. So in Romans, when you get to the promised land, we're talking about that life that Jesus talked about. That's why he came, to give us what we were created for. And so now we're standing at the edge of the promised land. The 40 years are behind us. And the census, every census tells a story of some kind. I know when you read it, you probably don't like reading 54 verses of names. Am I right? Shame on you. No, I'm joking. It takes a lot of work to dig in there and look at the stories behind that. And God is retelling the stories much like a family does. You know, when my first wife died, my children were 1 and 3. And I remember at birthday, there was no one that knew the story except me. So I began a habit. For years we did this as a family. On every birthday, I would tell them the story of their birth. Because they couldn't remember. And Judy wasn't there. She was with the Lord. And so I would repeat the story so they would have that sense of a story. So whenever God is telling us a census, He's reminding us of a story. Now, it's hard for us because we didn't live through that story. And we don't know those names, most of them. But it's still a story for somebody. And so every census is important because it's fulfilling the promises of God. What did He say to Abraham? I'm going to make your offspring so numerous they're like dust. You can't even count them. Like sand on the seashore. So every time we come across a census, we have a story. Well, we have a census here. We're going to look at 2 chapters, okay? This is a census. So it's the second census. The first census was at the beginning of Numbers. That's the census of death. Because you all rebelled, you're not going to enter the promised land. And now 40 years later, none of them are alive. That's what the second census tells us. This is the census of life. These are the second generation followers who have learned from the first generation. Oh, they made their mistakes. We saw that last week. They made it through the problem with the Midianites. They made it through that, and they're still God's people. So now they're cleaning up and getting ready to go into the promised land. It's a census of life. And so the fact that He gives His second census, there's nobody in here that was part of the first census except for, do you know who? Who are the 2? Joshua and Caleb. Those are the 2, right? Moses isn't even going to make it. And we'll see that in just a minute. Joshua and Caleb. Yeah. And those 2 guys, man, they had to pay a price for 40 years of wandering in the desert. Joshua tells us that desert was horrible. Snakes, scorpions, unbearable heat, no food, no water. They had to endure 40 years to get to this place. I can't even imagine what their excitement is like to have all this second generation of followers going, we're ready, let's go into the promised land. So now we're entering to the phase where we're going to pass the torch, okay, to the next generation. But along the way, we're not going to read all the names. That would be, I'd have you all asleep by the time we're done. I'm not going to do that. But I want to highlight just a couple of things through the census to remind you of the story, how God puts everything within a context of a story. The whole Bible is one story from beginning to end, comprised of a bunch of little narratives all along the way. Okay? And they all tell the same message, that we serve an incredible God. The message is the same. So, the torch is being passed. It has been passed to this new generation now. And so, there's some interesting facts throughout here about God's sovereignty. Numbers 26, verse 9. Verses 9 through 11. He says, the sons of Eliab were Nemuel, Dathan, Abiram. The same Dathan and Abiram were the community officials who rebelled against Moses and Aaron and were among Korah's followers when they rebelled against the Lord. The Lord's reminding them of that was in Numbers 16. We passed through that, where He killed the 260 leaders who were encouraging the people to try to kill Moses and Aaron. The earth opened its mouth and swallowed them along with Korah, whose followers died when the fire devoured the 250 men. And they served as a warning sign. Now, this tiny little verse stands out. However, the line of Korah did not die out. It's called grace. Okay? So the people who were guilty died. But the line didn't die out. And then you go over to verse 19. Er and Onan were sons of Judah, but they died in Canaan. Okay, that's the story in Genesis 38 of Judah and Tamar. So Judah was one of the 12 sons. Tamar was a daughter-in-law. And her husband died. So in keeping with the requirements, the next son was Onan, the next one was Er. And so they were to marry her and bear offspring in behalf of the brother. And they both refused, and God took their life because they were evil. Because they sinned against Him. They wouldn't follow through. They didn't want to do that. So God took both their lives. So they made it in here too. This is part of the story. So sometimes I look at the story of the Bible this way. It is part of a cosmological battle. You can't forget that. This is a real spiritual warfare. Okay, the Bible gives us so much information on this. For example, we've mentioned it many times in Ephesians 3, that God displays His wisdom through us to all the powers and authorities in the heavenlies. You're on display. That's why I say your life matters. What happens to you is being observed. Paul says angels long to look because they're astonished at God's grace over and over and over again in our lives. And it's not because we're spectacular. It's not because we are supernatural, because we do extraordinary things. It's not that at all. It's simply because once you come to the Lord, your faith cannot die. You can get mad, you can get upset, you can get discouraged, you can do all kinds of things. But your faith doesn't go anywhere. You hang in there till the end. That's what Job teaches us. So we learn that from Ephesians 3. All of us, with what's happening, is we're on display. Okay? Then we learn at the end of Ephesians that He reveals His glory to the world through us. So we're on display to the world, we're on display to all the heavenlies and what's happening. So what we do is important there. And so these are the stories that help us. And these people make it into these stories, this long story, so that we can trace it. We're not going to trace every name. First of all, you don't have information on every name, but we do along the way with several of them. And then in verse 33, you have Zelophehad, a little parenthesis here. Zelophehad, son of Hepher, had no sons. He had only daughters, whose names were Mahlah, Noah, Haglah, Milcah, and Tirzah. I don't know anybody who's named their daughters that, by the way. Okay? And why would he throw this in the middle of a census? There were others that had daughters. In fact, in verse 46, Asher had a daughter named Sarah. But why this one? Okay, what's unique about that situation? There were no sons. Okay, now, in contrast to all of the ancient nations, when you read the Bible, it looks like sons were favored. Okay? They were favored to the exclusion of daughters. That's what it looks like. And now, after 40 years of study, I've changed my mind on that. I don't believe that at all. I think that sons had a different role than daughters because of Genesis at the fall. Your seed, your son, is going to destroy this enemy, this serpent. And that became what I think of as the quest for the son, not because they were better. Okay? So every time an Israelite mother gave birth to a child, and it was a son, what was the question? Is this the one? Is this the one? Maybe this is the one. Is this the one? Okay? They're waiting for that son. And so the sons weren't better than daughters. They had a different role to play in the history, the stories of what God is doing. And so we see that when we went through Leviticus. I asked you the question: if a daughter is born, if a son is born, the mother's unclean for 8 days, and if the daughter's born, she's unclean for 2 weeks. Well, that sounds chauvinistic, doesn't it? If a daughter's born, why is the mother unclean twice as long for the son? So I asked all the moms, you tell me. Okay? Unlike all the other ancient nations, when you give birth to a child, in all the ancient nations, you kept working, you didn't stop. Okay, we have stories of some of the women in the ancient nations giving birth right in the field, wrapping their child up, and they keep working in the field. But because you're unclean, you stay home and rest. Would you rather rest for 1 week or 2 weeks? Every mom started laughing when I asked that question, just like a bunch of you did. So the question isn't why women were unclean for longer. The real question is, why were the mothers of boys unclean shorter? We asked the wrong question. Because it's a blessing to be unclean because you can rest and heal. And now we know that that's an important part. Okay? So why is it shorter for boys? Because of circumcision. It's not an indictment against women. It's not that at all. And the more I study the scriptures, the more I see that. And so all the way through there, you see in the various censuses, you see the stories of these women just being slowly honored in a fallen world. So in this ancient world, okay, in the ancient world, all the law codes were designed to protect the males, those in power. That's me. I'm not going to lie. My life is different than most of you women because I'm a Caucasian male. I can't change that. I've talked the last couple of weeks about how I became a champion of those who don't have the same opportunities I have had. And so the ancient law codes are designed to protect the men, those that are in power. But on the Mosaic law, it changed. It's there to control the men for the protection of those that don't have as many rights. Remember back in Numbers 5? If the husband thinks the wife has been unfaithful, take her down to the tabernacle. The priest puts dirt in the water. She drinks it. If she's been unfaithful, she swells. If not, she doesn't. Well, that sounds chauvinistic until you realize in every other country, he could beat her, he could execute her, he could kill her, he could do what he wanted, divorce her. But you can't do that in Israel. It's the one place where God says, I'll exonerate the women. It's now adjudicated. No, you can't lay a hand on her. You have to bring her down to the tabernacle to a priest, and God will show you. And so it's a protection for the women. We're the only country Israel is the only country that had those rules like that. So the law was there, the Mosaic law, to begin to reverse what happened at the fall and show dignity to everybody that had lost it. Women, children, foreigners, slaves, trees. When you go into the land, let the trees rest for a year because they've been abused. Animals, a righteous person takes care of their animals. So dignity is being restored through the Mosaic law, and the Mosaic law becomes a beacon of what we were created to be like as humans. Okay? So, we have these women mentioned. Why? Why did he single out this one man who had no sons? Interesting, huh? Okay. So this story, this census weaves more of the story into the larger story of God's grace. Okay. Now, when you compare the tribes from the beginning of Numbers, the first census, with the tribes of the second census, they're almost identical. Not quite, but almost, with one exception. Remember last week we talked about Zimri, and he brought a Moabite, Midianite woman into the camp right in front of all the leaders to have sex with her. And Phinehas, one of the priests, and he runs and he stabs him with a spear and kills him, and God blesses him for his zeal for the Lord. Okay, that tribe, Zimri was the leader in that tribe. That tribe diminishes considerably, drops down by 50% when you compare the numbers. And what we see is when you compare the censuses, the two censuses, at the end of 40 years, those tribes that have demonstrated faithfulness have grown. And those tribes that have not have shrunk. Why is this important? Because their reward is an inheritance in the land. The tribes that have been faithful, they get a lot of land. Tribes that have not get smaller land. The tribe like Simeon that Zimri came out of is half the size, and they get a small plot. I laugh when I watch. I've told you many times, forgive me if your politics are most important. They're not that important to me. Okay? I laugh watching the nation right now. I've lived long enough. I've lived enough years to watch mass movements of people around the country, and we're such a pendulum people. That's the way our forefathers envisioned it. I love this young generation. You can go on to social media and say, what's happened to they monitor all the U-Haul trucks, the Ryder trucks, the moving companies, and they have dots, and they're all moving to certain states. Right now, because it's real attractive, given our politics, for some people to go to southern states. I'm not making a political statement here. I don't care what your politics are. I'm just fascinated with the fact that the country is shifting population over time. There's nothing new about that. That's what our forefathers envisioned. Okay? If you don't like your governor, vote him out or move to another state. It's a pretty simple process that we created. And so you can watch the population over the decades of our country. You can watch them shift. And what's the impact of that? The House of Representatives is always changing. So the states that are popular, they get more representatives. That's a little picture of what's happening back here. Now, I'm not trying to make a statement that the states that are growing are the faithful ones and the states that are shrinking are the unfaithful ones. I don't think that way. But that's what was happening here. Okay? So Zimri, because of his sin, Simeon got really small. And the other tribes who didn't do that got bigger and they got more land, they had more power. So it's a real fascinating journey when you study this through the scriptures, and then it's a fascinating journey when you've lived, if you're an old person like me, and you've lived long enough to see that our population shifts. If you don't like your governor, the Supreme Court has said that you don't like your governor, vote him out or move. It's a simple proposition. You don't have to stay where you are. And people move all the time. You just do that, And so it's just a journey. It's what's happening. What this shows is it's a new beginning. The chapter from Exodus out of Egypt is now closed. That chapter is done. That generation is gone. This generation is a new generation. This chapter is closed. Never to be repeated. Now, God reminds them regularly, I brought this first generation out of slavery to Egypt as a reminder of his faithfulness. He didn't give up on him. And this becomes the foundation for baptism. In Romans 6, you have been freed from slavery, not Egypt, slavery to sin. And so baptism is a great means of celebration in front of the community, saying, I have been freed from slavery to sin. It's the story. What happens in the Old Testament is our story. It's just under the new covenant. We now understand more of the ontological, the spiritual nature of it. We've been freed. So all of these stories all play out in the New Testament, every one. So he reminds them faithfully, remember what I did to your forefathers? But that chapter is now closed. So the census it marks a new beginning. So the question is, God's not giving up with his people. The question is, what's God going to do with it now? And this is what begins to unfold after this. Numbers and Deuteronomy, they're just right there. They're at the edge of the promised land, but they're not quite in it yet. That happens when Joshua. So the law begins to adjust. God begins to make changes to the law in Deuteronomy. For example, the law given in Leviticus, it's for a nomadic people that travel together. So if you kill an animal, you have to take it to the tabernacle. Well, you're all right there by the tabernacle. In Deuteronomy, you can't do that because you may live 100 miles away, because now you're a settled nation within the land. So the laws begin to subtly adjust in Deuteronomy to take advantage of a nation that's now spread out in fulfillment of the promise to Abraham. Right? Can't even count them. There's so many now. And so it makes that adjustment. So that's a lot of history to help you understand. This is a significant turning point in the book. We're there. It was right there. Moses has to give them Deuteronomy, the law, repeat the covenant with them, get this new generation to say the same thing the first generation said. Okay, all that God has said, we will do. And they did. Until that generation died. And we have another problem. But that's for another time. Okay? And so it's a new beginning. So what's God going to do about it? The entire generation that left Egypt is gone. Now, the fact that Korah's line was not cut off shows grace. You see, the descendants of Korah, they wrote 11 psalms of their praise for God. I'm going to read one of them to you because you actually know it. It's Psalm 42. It's one of the ones that we sing that always makes me kind of chuckle because we've turned it into a Western mindset. As a deer pants for the water brook, so my soul pants for thee, O God. It's a story of me and God. That's not the purpose of the psalm at all. The ancient Israelites never dreamed of individual worship. Worship was done in community. So when we turn it into a Western view, listen to the psalm. I'm just going to read it to you. This is the sons of Korah. As the deer pants for the streams of water, so my soul pants for you, my God. My soul thirsts for God, for the living God. When can I go meet with God? My tears have been my food day and night, while people say to me all day long, where is your God? These things I remember as I pour out my soul, how I used to go to the house of God under the protection of the Mighty One with shouts of joy. These are all plurals. How we all used to go. This is a leader. We can't worship God because we've been deported, exiled as a people group. When can we go back to the temple and worship God again? And as good old American Westerners, we tend to think of worship as a private thing. They never thought that way. Worship is what we do together. That's what real worship is. That's why Hebrews 13 says to continually together offer up sacrifice of praise, which is what we're doing this morning. We're going to do it again. So the ancient Israelites didn't think of like we do. Wherever I am, I can find God in the mountains. They would have laughed at that. No, we find God when we're together. That's why we work really hard to make this experience a life-giving one for you. So you want to be here. Okay? I don't want you to come out of duty. That generation's past. That's my grandparents. I want you to come here because you can't wait to just rest. And together we enjoy the Lord. That's the sons of Korah. They had paid a tremendous price, okay, in this census because of Korah. He led the rebellion. And a bunch of their people had died because of it. So they wrote some of the most wonderful 11 Psalms in the book of wrestling with this very phenomenon. Okay? So what this shows us, this right here, I've said it over and over again, all the prophets after this are going to flesh it out in great detail. But the principle is still the same. God says, I decide which nation to rise up, which one to destroy. Vote your conscience. Get involved in politics. Go do your thing. But don't ever lose sight of the fact that having the right president is not the answer. Having the right God is the answer. Now, when the righteous rule, the people rejoice. Proverbs tells us. So we do want people in leadership that make good decisions, don't we? And we don't want people that make bad decisions. I'll let you decide which is which, because I know our congregation is divided on that. And that's fine. You keep voting your conscience and stay out there doing everything you can to make changes for good. But as a church, don't we want to be known as people that love rather than Republican or Democrat for our politics? I've asked that question for 12 years. Wouldn't we rather be known as that? When the world out there thinks of us, what do you want them to say? I know what they're saying about a lot of the other evangelical churches, and it's not pretty. But I want them to say about DCC, there's a church that cares for the poor. There's a church that loves each other. There's a church that comes running when somebody's in trouble. We're getting ready to pray for Pam. Pam's sitting right back here, and she has a serious surgery coming up on Friday, right? And we just prayed for Kathy Hill, okay? We just prayed for the Ashleys last week. Leslie broke her ankle, okay? And then on top of that, you got shingles. Hurting and pain, sick as can be, when her granddaughter's born. Okay? We should run to these people. And there's others of you that are struggling as well. In fact, let's just stop and pray for Pam. Pam, raise your hand. She said I could pray for her as long as she didn't have to come up here. So some of you are friends right around her. Just lay your hand on her. Let's stop and pray for her. Father, Pam, Mark's not here right now, but he'll be back. Father, Pam is seriously sick and getting ready to have surgery. So God, we just lift her up to you. She's our sister. She's one of us. She needs your grace. Lord, she needs your healing. And she needs to have really good doctors because this is a complicated surgery. So I pray that you would give them wisdom to walk through this. Thank you for your goodness. In Jesus' name, amen. You see, this is what we're all about. Shouldn't we be known for this? Shouldn't we be known? Oh, politics are important. Get out there and do your thing. Vote on it. But let's don't divide over this. Okay? Let's continue to, as Jesus said, they will know that you're my disciples by your love for one another, not your beliefs, your politics. They're important, but they're not near as important as what we do. So, this shows that God is in control. Okay, then in chapter 27, we're not going to read it, it's one of my favorite stories. The daughters of Zelophehad, they reappear. Here's what's going on. In the census, the very last thing it says at the census, this is how you are to divide up the land among all the males. Okay, the males get the land. So, it's real simple. The inheritance law in the Mosaic law was very simple. If a man dies, the land passes to the sons. If there's no sons, the land passes to his brothers. Well, these 5 daughters aren't very happy with that. They're just not very happy with it. So, verse 5. So they go to Moses and complain. Why? Why don't we get an inheritance? Our father wasn't even part of Korah. He just didn't have any sons. Why don't we get an inheritance? We're women. Why can't we have it? I love it. It's one of the early times of women standing up against the Mosaic law and saying, this isn't fair. So, Moses, being the brave man that he is, he brought the case before the Lord. He doesn't make a decision. He goes, oh boy, okay, we're going to have to deal with this. He brings it before the Lord. The Lord said to him, what Zelophehad's daughters are saying is correct. You must certainly give them property, here it is, as an inheritance. The land is passing legally into the ownership of women. This may be the first time, I've not found any other example, they're better scholars than me, where women owned property. They weren't allowed to. Until this verse right here. Give it to them as an inheritance. I just love this story. I just love their courage. By the way, when we get to the end of Numbers, they reappear, but we'll wait a few weeks for that. They reappear and they argue about something else. They stand up. Okay, so inheritance, here's the amazing thing about it. They're not even in the promised land and they're already arguing. That's not a fair distribution of land. God says you're right. So let's redistribute the land. So now the new law is that if a man dies, the land passes to the sons. If there's no sons, it passes to the daughters. As a legal inheritance, you get to own it. It's in your name. Yeah, it's in your name. It's yours. Okay? They haven't even had a chance to carry out the inheritance laws yet, and God changes the law. Okay, how many of you have seen Pride and Prejudice? Okay, that's based on Inheritance 1.0. The women didn't get to own land. They never modified their inheritance laws so the women could own property. I don't know why not. And so this is a beautiful passage of as they wrestled with the ethics of it in a changing culture, these daughters can say, it's not fair that we don't get land because we're women. And God says, no, you're right. Let's change it. Boom. And it gets changed. It's not the only time this happens. There's other times too. That shows you that the law was not rules the way we think of it. The laws were a beacon of what humanity is created for, showing dignity to everybody. And at this point in history, all of a sudden the women are saying, well, we have dignity too. And God says, bingo, we'll change the law. I love that passage. So, that's the first one. And then the second half of the chapter is Joshua succeeds Moses. Okay? Remember Moses struck the rock instead of speak to it? You're not going to enter the promised land. So God says, now it's time. Okay? You're on this side of the Red Sea. You're on this side of the Jordan, I mean. You can't go into the land. It's time to appoint a successor. So in Numbers 27, chapter, verse 12. The Lord said to Moses, go up this mountain in the Abiram range and see the land I have given you, the Israelites. After you have seen it, you too will be gathered to your people, as your brother Aaron was. For when the community rebelled, you didn't do what I asked you to do. You blasphemed me in front of the people. You're not going into the promised land. Okay? So, he commissions Joshua, verse 18. So the Lord said to Moses, take Joshua, son of Nun, a man in whom is the spirit of leadership, and lay your hand on him. Have him stand before Eleazar the priest and the entire assembly and commission him in their presence. What we have in these two stories, they're beautiful stories, is we have a passing of the torch, which is started with this census. It's a new generation. Something brand new is happening. It's a new way of thinking. Women, you have rights. Welcome to the new world of the faithful. You have rights. And the Mosaic Law started that trajectory. No, you can't beat your wives. No, you can't do that. Okay? You have to treat them with honor. No, you can't beat your slaves. You have to treat them with honor. And so what starts in Leviticus is now starting to bear fruit. Women, you get to own the property. It's in your name. This is a breathtaking passage. And we're passing the torch in leadership. Moses has done his part. Now, just so you know, when we get to Jesus, Moses does appear in the promised land at the Mount of Transfiguration. He makes it there. Well, not the way he wanted. He got to see it. Okay. Now, we have two legacies presented. Women changed the course of history for women because of their courage. They stood up and said, this isn't right. And God said, I agree. Change the law. That fast. So women changed the course of history for women. It's beautiful. And building into someone else who will succeed you is another part. That's why I had Maggie read 2 Timothy 2, right? Build into those who will be faithful with it. That's what changes the course of history. And you guys all know, it's not a secret, Ryan is one of my best friends. He's replacing me, you know. He won't be as good as me, but that's okay. I got 6 years building into this kid. He's a kid to me, sorry. To you guys, the younger ones, he's an adult. I got 6 years. I'm so proud of he and Lauren. I could barely stand it. For him to take over, that's a dream. That's a dream for me. Because I've devoted my entire Christian life to mentoring young guys. I have guys all over the world that I still talk to. Guys that I mentored back 45 years ago that I had no clue what I was doing. But I still loved them. Right? We have two legacies in the making right here. I have one more story. 1991, Nancy and I moved to Germany as missionaries, and they asked us to consider teaching a Bible study. The military prison at that time was in Mannheim, Germany, which is where we were living. So I went to the U.S. Army prison there. Prisoners from all over, military, didn't matter what branch. And there was this young soldier came up to me. Don't remember his name. Can't remember what he looks like, but I never forgot his story. He came up to me and he said, I was raised in a Christian family, never got drunk, never did anything like that. And I got transferred to Greece with a new unit, didn't know anybody, and I was trying to fit in. And all of my fellow soldiers went out drinking, and I went out with them and got drunk. And I killed a Greek national. Under the Status of Forces Agreement, because that is a potential capital crime in America, and in Greece they don't allow capital crimes, he's not allowed to be repatriated back to the U.S. He has to serve his time in Greece. So he said, I've been sentenced to a lifetime of hard labor, life in prison, hard labor. And he's crying, and I'm crying. And he goes, my wife just gave birth to my son. I'm allowed one visitor a month for 15 minutes, not two, only one. I'll never get to see my son grow up. No chance for parole, no chance for anything. What's going to happen to me? I'm a brand new missionary. I hadn't even been to seminary. What do you say? But I remember these stories. And I said, I can't answer that question, but I can tell you this. One day, we'll see each other again. and you're going to tell me something about grace that I could never figure out. I've thought about him all these years, 34 years ago. Don't know what happened to him. But one day, in glory, I get to look him in the eyes and say, teach me about grace. Because that's what I believe. Legacy is important. So I'm going to leave you with this. We're going to be passing the torch here as a church. Well, we'll have a commissioning ceremony for Ryan, the elders will. And I'll probably be part of it. But look where we've come. So the question I want to leave you with, you're part of a grander story. That's the story. The second census is a shift now. The old door has closed and the new door's open. What are you going to do with it? I've asked you the last several weeks, are you going to love Ryan and Lauren the way you love Nancy and me? You're going to give them a chance, let him do stupid things like you let me do? You know, I made mistakes. A lot of them. And you were gracious. You laughed at me. Some of you got mad and left. Well, not you wouldn't be here if you got mad and left the church. But some of you people did leave the church. What are you going to do? More importantly than that, what is the legacy that you're leaving behind? That's the one thing you did get to control. What's your legacy? Is it a big house? A lot of wealth? Is it building into the people that are faithful? What is it? I can't control it. I can only control my own. But it's worth thinking about. Father, thank you for this incredible story, these 2 chapters. Every time I read them, I just feel my breath catching at how incredibly marvelous it is what happened. How 5 women changed the course of history because they knew what was right and you agreed with them. And how Moses had mentored Joshua his whole life, and he passed the torch to Joshua. Father, continue to help us be a church that passes the torch well. And I pray under Ryan's pastorate and any elders that this church is filled with young people and that they would pass the torch. Thank you for your goodness. In your Son's name, amen.